welcome to Trinity Church in Lime Rock. And I am very honored and pleased to be able to preside at this memorial service for Rex Woodgate. Please stand for our first prayer and then following our first hymn. The Lord be with you. Let us pray together. God our Father, we thank you that you have made each of us in your own image and given us gifts and talents with which to serve you. We thank you for Rex, the years shared with him, the good we saw in him, the love received from him. God, give us peace in our hearts as we leave Rex in your care, confident in your promise of eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
This passage from Ecclesiastes, sorry, it's a mouthful, has always been a favorite of mine. It's particularly meaningful to me today because it is the reading we used at the funeral of my husband, Theo Gruttman, about whom you'll hear a little bit later. Ecclesiastes 3, verses 1 through 8. For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to throw away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. The word of the Lord.
Remaining seated, let's say together Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Please stand as we sing together, Jerusalem. I hope many of you know this hymn and will join in our usual Episcopalian manner, which we all sing.
Sadly, Joyce Woodgate, Lynn, and Whitball could not be here with us today for this celebration of Rex. Let's briefly glance in the rearview mirror to understand the context of events and the old breed of Aston racers who have led us all here to this moment. It required a 12-year effort for Sir David Brown's sports car racing stars to come into alignment. We might say that 1959 was the perfect storm for Astons, and Brown himself was the foundational star. He always wanted to race his own car at Le Mans, and so got right to work, purchasing both Aston Martin and Lagonda in 1947, giving him the Adam chassis and the Bentley-designed racing engine. And when Astons raced, Brown ensured that they raced as a family, where the team managers, drivers, and mechanics all took meals together and bunked together, a cohesive unit of fraternity. Brown added more stars, hiring Ted Cutting, who was to become Aston's most famous race car designer, and John Wyer, who was to become an expert at winning Le Mans, the most demanding race ever devised by man. In 1959, 53 cars started the race. Only 13 completed the full 24 hours. That's a 75% failure rate, which was common in those days, as there was still much to learn about aerodynamics and metallurgy. As Juan Manuel Fangio has stated, you must drive slow enough to win. It was a race against the clock and the wearing down of the machinery and the drivers. In those days, drivers who won Le Mans were as famous as today's rock stars. Brown understood that racing improves the breed and sells cars, so that year's successful introduction of the new DB4 model to the all-important American market took center stage. The DBR2s were built to showcase the racing version of the DB4's 3.7-liter engine. Rex built two for Ted Cutting. Elisha Walker Jr.'s DBR2/1 campaigned here in America that year and in the bus, number 49 with George Constantine driving and Rex as team manager. In that year, Constantine's DBR2 entered 17 races, resulting in 5 first places, including the Nassau Trophy race, with Moss helping in the pits, 3 second places, and a 4th. Concurrently drove the factory's DBR2/2 to 2 wins in the Bahamas in 2 races, Rex attending. Those were driven by Moss. As a direct result of these successes, Rex was awarded the New York Times Best Race Mechanic, which made him most proud. Maturing that same year were the 3-liter DBR1s, the embarrassing design fault of the input gears to the David Brown 5-speed transaxle having finally been corrected. Rather amazingly, Brown had only budgeted the DBR1s for a single race that year at Le Mans, 3 cars, redirecting his limited racing funds to Aston's ill-fated Formula One endeavor. Rich Parnell was by then team manager. John Wyer was general manager of Aston Martin. And Aston's had world-class drivers, like the incomparable Sterling Moss as lead driver, Roy Salvadori, Carroll Shelby, Maurice Trintignant, Paul Frere, and Jack Fairman, plus the gifted race engineers working the pits. It was thanks to pressure applied by Sir Sterling that all 3 factory Ferraris self-destructed at Le Mans, allowing the DBR1s to come first and second. And again, thanks to Moss's entreaties and driving skill, also winning at the Nürburgring and the Goodwood Tourist Trophy, allowing Aston's to defeat Ferrari for Sports Car Championship of the World. Aston's was the only British manufacturer to win these two pinnacles of sports car racing. This fraternity of old breed racers produced Aston's perfect storm in 1959. Today we celebrate a gentleman of the old breed, a man of two countries. Make no mistake, Rex was a devoted Englishman first and foremost. But having been chosen by John Wyer to represent Aston's in America, Rex gave the colonies his full attention. Rex had the highest standards and dedication to the Aston Martin mark and his partnership with the Aston Martin Owners Club. He was the one true face of Aston's in America, a supremely confident company man without guile and a modest gentleman without vices. Behind every successful man is a strong woman. Joyce completed him. They were a rare team, strongly devoted to each other. And their sons, Neil and Chris, they would spend weekends vintage racing number 49, DB4 GT 0133L, or off downhill skiing in winter. Team Woodgate worked for us, and they will forever be a part of the Aston Martin Owners Club's North American fabric. Back in the day, our mechanics only had a workshop manual for reference. There were no training videos available and no budget for any of us to visit the factory for training. Rex would periodically hold impromptu lessons in the shop and have everyone gather around for his instruction. Rex would say, "I will explain anything over and over again until you get it. However, and as many times as you need, but don't ever tell me you get it when you don't." Our mechanics received that message loud and clear. And under Rex's leadership, all 13 of his disciples understood we were a part of something special. Rex was interviewed in 2012 by his friend Mike Jiggle for Vintage Race Car magazine, and to a good result. Rex put forth his true and correct philosophy. If you do a job, it has to be correct and look right. What's the point of doing a job if you're not going to do it correctly? I believe this to be the essence of the man, always striving for the highest level of excellence in himself and expecting it of his employees. Rex was least likely to speak in the first person. He just would not talk about himself. So I applaud Nick Candee for his excellent work detailing Rex's life accomplishments. There was one time, however, when I returned from a vacation in Italy where I'd stayed in a village above the Bay of Naples called Pozzuoli. When I mentioned that town to Rex, he said, "Oh yes." In about 1950, he and Sterling had been racing for HWM in the Naples Grand Prix. A Sterling Moss biography stated that Sterling was overdue to come around past the pits. And a message came along that he was unconscious alongside the car, or worse. The book said Rex Woodgate took off on the run. Rex told me we were instructed to never abandon the car. I picked Sterling up and carried him like a baby to the first aid station. Sterling had suffered a broken kneecap and lost 2 front teeth on the driver's mirror, but ultimately was none the worse for wear. This was the only time Rex had related to me any part of his past. From time to time, we'd have a little excitement in the office. Rex's secretary, Erika Moser, was a rather imposing German woman who was quite capable, had good heart, and was quick to laugh, a true asset in the office. However, she could become argumentative for reasons we could not always understand. Rex called her Moser. When she was in a good mood, she called him Woody. When she was in a so-so mood, she called him Woodgate. But when she called him Mr. Woodgate, we office staff would wisely recall some pressing issue out in the shop that needed our immediate attention. Rex's leadership carried Aston Martin through some pretty harrowing financial times. He kept his 13 disciples focused on the business at hand and insulated us from the daily trials and tribulations at the factory. Problems like, was the factory going to fit Chrysler engines to cut costs? Was Aston's going to merge with Jensen? When BMCD itself in financial straits was considering buying Aston Martin, we were summoned by the local BMC distributor to see how we might fit into their organization. These were all desperation moves by corporations already being driven out of business, and just frightening prospects to those of us at AML Inc. Fortunately, none of those things came to pass. As we might have expected, Rex, our troubleshooter extraordinaire, stepped in to save the day when he helped initiate the consortium that saved Aston Martin as company developments was headed down the tubes. Aware that some marks created friction with their owners' clubs, Rex cultivated and valued his close ties within the club. The Turners, the Nixons, the Balls, the Burgers, the Harrisons, the Freemans, the Tuccios, Nick Candee, and as he provided advisory and support roles to AMOC East events, especially at Lime Rock. To help ensure club members enjoyed their cars to the fullest, AML Inc., at Rex's direction, provided mechanics for tech inspections, and I bring a variety of spare parts for emergency repairs. Some of us would help judge concours, and some would run track events. I had a lot of fun running the practice event and became AMOC East treasurer for several years. Nank Dollier would lend me his DB6 Vantage shooting brake for Lime Rock because he felt it should be seen and appreciated. It's hard for me to imagine 50 years of the Lime Rock event. I'll not forget the very first Lime Rock where expectations and camaraderie carried the day. With Joyce's leadership, a number of women very professionally took on the timing responsibilities, and 7 competed in the club's first women's event, many for their first time on a racetrack. Family members competed so that the spirit of the day was race what you brung. Rex would race his DB4 GT. Roberts Harrison would bring LM22 for himself and his pristine D-type Jaguar for Rex. For the culmination of the day, Maestro would entertain us best with that straight-pipe beast of a D-type in full song. 3 side draft twin-choke Weber carburetors as God intended. Whenever I referred to Rex as Maestro, he would stare at me over the top of his glasses, letting me know I was out of line. Rex would go dancing with the D-type. In the stands, we'd hear the D-Jag howling through West Bend, into the diving turn until the pair drifted out onto the front straight. Rex winding out the gears, growing larger and louder, flying by the stands about 135, then with his foot still in it, a 4-wheel drift into the hairpin right-hander, a man in his element, never lifting off, his method of expressing himself and blowing off steam. We all soon came to understand that the track's telephone was by then ringing off the hook with neighbors' calls threatening to shut down the track for disturbing the peace. Rex would always treat himself to a follow-up flying lap, knowing he could get away with it. Upon completion, he would park the D-type, knowing the neighbors would be appeased. This brief two-lap dance of Rex's was repeated for years, much to our enjoyment, stark proof that it's much easier to apologize than gain permission. The D-type never failed to excite everyone in the valley, both negatively and positively. After our first banquet and trophies, we all knew we'd experienced something magical. That first event was so successful that plans were made for the next year before hitting the road for home. Judging by photos of Rex, I would suggest he derived great personal satisfaction from the recognition placed upon him by the owners' clubs awarding their top trophies for his numerous contributions both here and in the UK. The Victor Gauntlet Trophy, the Bertelli Trophy, and the coveted Elisha Walker Trophy, not just once but twice. It's as though Rex had lapped all the other recipients to take his second win. And those tokens of esteem must be shared with the lovely Joyce who gave so much of her time in support of her man. Rex's humble reaction that others were so much more deserving than he speaks volumes about the man. Rex might well have proclaimed, "Goodness gracious me." A man is the author of his own life. Rex did what he was born to do, and he would periodically reinvent himself to advantage. For 2 decades, Rex was the benchmark for Aston Martin excellence in America, as well as vintage racing to keep himself entertained. Next, he established a successful racing shop in the UK, joined the British Racing Drivers Club, and when he felt the time had come, he traded his race cars to pilot a sailboat, joining the Royal Southampton Yacht Club, and he was off once more with the wind in his face, making an impact wherever he went. To me, he seemed most centered behind a steering wheel, at speed, always living his life to the fullest without ever lifting off. Thanks to Rex, my Aston days were the best of times for me, and I'm proud to have stood in a great man's shadow.
David Linfoot, thank you very much. Sort of like one of the characters in a Bond movie at the King of Prussia headquarters for Aston Martin America. Mr. Linfoot was number 2. And if Rex wasn't around, David was the other guy to make sure we kept our cars running. But before I remember other people, I would just like to share with the folks who may not appreciate that Rex and Joyce's 2 wee lads are with us, and boys, if you'd like to stand up. Chris and Neil, if you kindly stand up and say hello to Mom home in Southampton. And Joyce, our trophy queen for many years at our banquets over at the Interlaken or wherever. Joyce was not able to join us, but Chris came from Toaster in Oxfordshire, and Neil came from Seattle, so it wasn't just a casual walk-in. I figured the choir might appreciate the devotion. So my role is to have a brief moment of remembrance for other people that aren't with us. And marking 50 years of our celebrating Aston Martins here at Lime Rock, there's an old expression used by one of our late editors, Mr. May, Chris May, that we stand on the shoulders of those who went before us. And our previous chair people included Elisha Walker, for whom our highest award is named, the 2 Normans, Norman Milne on the West Coast, and Norman Pickering on the East Coast. And for you hi-fi fanatics, yes, that was the Pickering of the Pickering phonograph cartridge. And then he was followed by Charlie Turner of Atlanta, a remarkable character. Further followed by the founders of this event, the late Chuck Nixon and Joyce Nixon. And we have a couple former editors here with us. I see Don Rose, who did the repackaging of the magazine early in the new century. But Joyce, for years, cranked out the periodical on their duplicating machine, which was nicknamed the Amok Beast for putting out the Amok East newsletter. What I'd like to do right now is have a moment to remember other members we've lost over the pandemic. And if you could share with me those who come to your mind, feel free. I'm going to talk about Theo Gruttman in a moment. I believe we lost Dan Ghosh. Any other people that come to mind that we'd like to remember? Please speak up. Steven Silberberg. We, as non-Jews, had a virtual sitting show for Steve. He is one of our dearest friends in the metro area. So, anyone else? Say again? David Van Swyck, thanks, Fast Eddie. That was pre-pandemic, and we're trying to cover who we might have missed in the pandemic. And I would just like to have a big thanks for the team at Trinity for hosting us. We concluded just having a moment of silence at dinner was not going to cut it, and particularly to celebrate all that Rex did for us. And I would particularly like to remember Theo. Was one of the first people that I met on my first pilgrimage to Lime Rock. This is a holy place, Reverend Heidi, and came here first in '77. And Theo was one of the first people that I met. Also, Win and Let Ball, Wit and Lynn Ball. I can speak English really, from Pennsylvania, and a number of other people welcomed us as newcomers to the Amok fold, and I think. That kind of welcoming is what has kept us together. As our chairman, Dr. Bob Welch, likes to put it, we came to the cars, we saved for the people. So anyway, I could go on a little bit more about Theo, born in Essen, Germany, came to this country, picked up a camera, made a living as a photographer, had some fabulous cars. Quick movie survey. Anybody remember seeing the movie To Catch a Thief? With Leonardo DiCaprio? Catch Me If You Can. Thank you. To Catch Me If You Can. Anybody know whose car that was? It was Theo's silver DB5 that he drove in the little vignette in that movie. That's a bit of movie trivia to call the afternoon. But Theo was always a wonderful, if not quiet guy. He was very hard to photograph, even though he took some of our best photographs in the history in our archives. He was then followed by Ed Hyman of Connecticut. But I just want to have a moment of warm remembrance of the other people that aren't with us. And Theo was one of those people that was, my heart was sore seeing Theo. So, and I'm very glad that Judy Gruttman is here with us to help celebrate Theo as representative of our other members that are with us. Without further comment from me, I'd like to hear from Ms. Elaine Walker-Fiske. Elaine's email is EWF49. You may have picked up that that's the number on the DVR2 race car and on Rex's race car. So Elaine Walker-Fiske, if you please. Thank you.
Good afternoon. As all of you gathered here know far better than I, Rex Woodgate was a towering figure in the history of the world of Aston Martin. His enthusiasm for cars, his expertise as a mechanic, as a race driver, has kept generations of owners happily behind the wheels of their cars, either on a racetrack or just the open road. But I'm not here to speak to that side of Rex Woodgate, as that's a side I don't know very well. No, what I'd like to talk about is the man I knew 62 years ago, when I was just 13 years old, and Rex came to live on Long Island. In 1955, my father was in England and impulsively bought a DBR-2-4, followed the next year by a DBR-2-4 Mark III. He then started amateur racing with George Constantine as the driver. In the summer of 1958, he imported a DBR-2, the DBR-2-1 we've heard about, from the factory in England. And on August 24th, he won the first professional race in the United States right here at Lime Rock. It was in December of '58 that Rex came to be the mechanic for that DBR-2-1. And during 1959, they won many races, ending the year winning Nassau Speed Week ahead of Sterling Moss. That was to be our family's last race. In December, Rex received the New York Times Mechanic of the Year award and proudly recalled it as the first time this award had gone to a sports car mechanic rather than one from the Indy 500. I think that's already been mentioned today, so we know how important that award was to him. I am recounting this abbreviated version of those years to help explain the environment in which I grew up as from the ages of 9 to 13. In December of 1958, Rex came to live with us briefly before returning to England to get Joyce. He and Joyce then lived nearby until the end of 1959. During that year, I would come home from school every day and run to the garage to find Rex on his back underneath a car and bring him his anxiously awaited cold beer. He had a great sense of humor, as we all know, so I guess I thought it funny to pull a prank on him. I filled a beer can with warm swimming pool water, and he took a big gulp. He later assured me that he took it in the spirit of the prank of a 13-year-old, but said it was a big ugh. And I still today can hear Rex saying, ugh. He later, let's see. And we both would reminisce about the time that we were in Elkhart Lake, Wisconsin. He let me twirl his mustache with the wax I had given him for Christmas, although I was quickly corrected that one twiddles a mustache. And his was most distinctive for sure. I think it might have been behind his back, but I remember as a child hearing him referred to as Sexy Rexy. I don't recall what we would talk about back then or what we would do, but I'll never forget how happy I was to spend that time with him. We created a bond that has influenced my life, and in that bond, the number 49 has touched everything from my license plate starting in 1968 to emails and passwords today. We always kept in touch over the years with Christmas cards and visiting Rex and Joyce in 2008 and again in 2018 when I had occasion to be in Southampton. On that trip, I was happy to introduce my daughter Abby, who's here today, and two of my granddaughters to both Rex and Joyce as we all had lunch together. I think even my granddaughters got a sense of what Rex had meant to me. Rex and Joyce also stayed with us in 2010 when he was honored here at Lime Rock at the, I call it AMOC, I had never heard it called AMOC, annual dinner. What struck me from those visits was how Rex hadn't changed, how there was still his innate warmth of personality, his genuine interest in other people, the total lack of any boasting about his significant accomplishments. I realized 60 years later that I had been right when at age 13, I identified Rex as a prince of a man and a true man indeed. I feel so fortunate to have known him. Thank you.
Remaining in our seats, let us Let's make our personal thanksgiving to God for all that Rex and all our friends who we remember today have meant to us. We'll keep a moment of silence, and if you'd like to say a prayer aloud, please do so, or silently. And so, gathering up all our gratitude for the past and our hopes for the future, we say together, for all the lives of those we have loved and who have loved us, we give thanks for them and are grateful for our memories. Amen. Please stand for the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. And let us say our concluding prayer together. O Lord, support us all the day long, until the shadows lengthen and the evening comes, and the busy world is hushed, and the fever of life is over, and our work is done. Then, in your mercy, grant us a safe lodging and a holy rest and peace at the last. Amen. our choir is going to sing a musical Amen. And so we'll stand and listen to that before the organ improvisation begins. Let us bless the Lord. Thanks be to God. Glory to God, whose power working in us can do infinitely more than we can ask or even imagine. Glory to him from generation to generation in the church and in Christ Jesus forever and ever. This concludes our service for today.